Hey everyone, welcome to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We're excited to be coming to you live courtesy of our new broadcasting partner, moretalk.tv. I'm honored to welcome to the show this week Dr. Gregory Little. Dr. Little is author of the authoritative guide to America's mound sites, entitled Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Mounds and Earthworks. He has also co-authored the book Mound Builders. Both he and his wife, Laura Little, have been featured in documentaries on the Discovery Channel, Learning Channel, History Channel, Sci-Fi, MSNBC, and National Geographic. For a number of years, Greg and Laura Little have conducted ARE tours of America's mounds and earthworks. This summer, Greg will be leading the ARE, the Ohio-West Virginia Mound Builders Tour, and this is from July 8th through the 13th. In this, they will visit nearly 50 mounds and also be performing native ceremonies. For the first time, they will be allowed access to mound sites that mimic the layout of the center city of Atlantis, as described by Plato some 2,400 years ago. For details, you can go to edgarcayce.org/tours, or you can call the Travel Programs Office toll-free at 888-273-3339. The registration deadline is June 2nd and space is limited, so sign up now. Dr. Little has also worked in the past with the ARE in its Search for Atlantis project and has over 30 books in print in various areas of psychology. Dr. Greg Little, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I think this is the first show in a while, so it's a privilege to be on.
Absolutely. We're honored to have you. And for our first question, I know you're well known for your work with the ARE in the Search for Atlantis project, and also now your extensive work into America's mound sites. But I was wondering, how did you first get introduced to the Edgar Cayce readings?
It's a deep question that I'm not sure I can really answer. I recall in college reading some books on Edgar Cayce, and that was actually probably like in 1967 or 68. And I don't really know where the book came from or how I found it, but I remember reading it. And then I read some material about Cayce, actually, that was published in some psychology journals. And that led me to read some of Cayce's readings, particularly the health readings at the time, and I was impressed with those. But the main thing I was impressed with were his experiences, particularly around age 13, and seeing things when he was a child, having what most psychologists would call invisible friends or fantasy friends. But I was quite interested in all that, and it's kind of a spiritual or supernatural thing. But, that's very global, but I can't answer it better than that. I don't really remember.
No, that's great. Thank you. How did your research into the readings as you pursued them further affect you as a scholar with your background being in psychology?
Well, the truth is I knew Cayce's his health readings were considered very accurate.
Right.
His readings on history, though, I was not familiar with them at all. And back around the year 2000 or so, John Van Auken actually asked me to look into Cayce's readings regarding mound builders, and I didn't know there was a great deal on it. And as I recall, there are 68 Cayce readings that talk about ancient American history and or American mounds. And I had been fascinated with mounds since the 80s, and that's a story in itself. So I decided to look into those readings, and slowly but surely then I found the readings on Indian mounds, but then I started finding the readings on Atlantis. I had always had an interest in that, and one thing led to another, basically, and then I really started looking at all the readings that Cayce did on ancient history. And I got kind of intrigued by all that, and some of it is clearly verified and is true. Some of it we really don't know yet, and there's very few things that I can say that I've found that I would say are wrong. Very
Right.
few, just maybe one or two readings out of all of them.
Right. And how exactly, as you did your research, did you find that Cayce related to the mound builders? What exactly did he have to say?
Well, one of the first times that I got introduced to it was doing a video interview with Edgar Evans Cayce. And Edgar Evans, I asked him about his father and times that they lived in Kentucky and Alabama, which are in the mound building areas. Edgar Evans told me they never went and visited mounds, but he said they all knew they were around there. And then he
Right.
said, and I can vividly recall this, he moved his hands a lot, and he said, well, Dad said that the mound builders came up from the south. He said he didn't say they came down from the north. They came up from the south. And that is the exact opposite of what American archaeology says. American
Right.
archaeologists say they started like in the Ohio area and then moved south. But Edgar Cayce said they actually started in the southernmost part of the United States and then moved northward. And that actually was verified around 1997, that was the truth, that mound building actually started in the southernmost states and then gradually moved north. And I was very impressed by that, because up until 1997, Cayce's idea about where the mound builders came from or where it originated in America was considered absolute nonsense. Today it's accepted.
Right. That's great. And does that link them to the ancient Mayan and cultures that were existing in Mexico prior to that, or
Well, there
did you
are
find a connection
some.
there?
It's pretty clear that some groups came up from the Mexico City area. They probably weren't the Mayans, because they were probably before the Mayans and probably even before the Olmecs. Some of these
Okay.
people came up. It's accepted in mainstream archaeology that some of these folks went into the Florida area, particularly around Crystal River, which is somewhat north of Tampa. And they started some mound complexes there. But earlier than that, chances are some people came up from the south, from Mexico City area, and settled in parts of Louisiana and Mississippi and started cultures there. Now, exactly where they went from there is unknown. And how this belief system that they had, and I've become really interested in their ideas about death and what's called the path of souls and the death journey. But where all that came from, that is a really big mystery. But it's pretty clear that yes, they did come up from there. Cayce said that the mounds were replicas of the Atlantis experience and the Gobi experience, which actually sounds kind of strange in a way, except there are American mounds and mound sites and earthworks. When I talk about mounds, I also mean earthworks, which are forms of earth, linear forms of earth that are created into various shapes. And some of these are massive. In fact, the largest earthworks in the world are in America. They are really an undiscovered treasure by most people. But he said that they were built to be replicas, and there are some that are built to the exact specifications of Plato's Atlantis. And I was kind of bowled over by that when I found that. And that's one of the sites that we're going to on a mound tour this summer. That, of course, is sponsored by the ARE.
Great. And why do you think there is so little known about it, or it seems that scholars are not, actively pursuing it other than yourself? Is it a link to a Smithsonian cover-up, or is it just a general disinterest in it?
Well, I don't. I've just completed a book with Andrew Collins, and it's not out yet. It'll be out probably in July when we take the mound tour, but I don't believe the Smithsonian is covering up. I think that the Smithsonian is a victim of itself in a way. Some of it is their own incompetence, some of it is mainstream archaeology. But it goes back to ideas that the mound builders were a lost civilization, an advanced civilization that was exterminated by the so-called savage Indians that were found here when the first Europeans came in. So there's some sort of racial problem in all this, and archaeologists try to steer clear of it. They don't want to partake in it. And there's another issue that's going on that actually has ground mainstream American archaeology to a halt. And that is they really can't excavate in mounds anymore. They can't do any research on skeletons recovered from mounds or any Native American skeletons. They simply can't do it because of the law. Federal law prohibits that. And starting around the year 1998, 1999, it all ground to a halt. And there's not much they can do about it. So I don't see anything really happening in American archaeology in the foreseeable future. So I don't see it as a conspiracy. I just think there's a lot of factors that have all kind of coalesced at the same time that have ground everything to a halt.
Right. Makes sense. And you mentioned Atlantis a number of times. What is exactly the connection between the mound builders and Atlantis?
Well, the only connection that I can give is this. Edgar Cayce's readings made it very clear that before Atlantis was destroyed, there were three different waves of migrations that came from this island empire, this continent of islands. And these three waves of migrations of the Atlanteans who survived went to different areas of the world. And one of those areas that they went to was in the northeastern United States. And Cayce said that the red race was the Atlantean race, and that the Iroquois, particularly the nobles in the Iroquois tribes, were the remnants or direct descendants of the Atlanteans. Now, Cayce also said Atlanteans went to Egypt. Some of them went to the Pyrenees Mountains. A few went to the Gobi. And all those places have a type of DNA, and it's not human DNA. It is found in humans. It's called mitochondrial DNA. I can't possibly explain that in an hour here. But all those places have the same kind of genetic marker that has been found in the remains that have been recovered there. So that is the link, the real link to Atlantis and Mounds. It comes from Edgar Cayce. There are other people who have suggested in the past, like Ignatius Donnelly, that some of the mounds and some of the Mayan structures, Mayan pyramids, are remnants of Atlantis also. But Cayce was quite specific about it. He was quite specific to say that the Iroquois in particular were the descendants of the Atlanteans. And interestingly, the mounds in the area of the traditional Iroquois areas, those have brought out skeletons that have been tested genetically, and those have this type of mitochondrial DNA that we identified as Atlantean some time ago. Actually, I think around the year 2000 is when we first said that a type called haplogroup X is actually Atlantean DNA, and about half of all the skeletons that were recovered and tested in the mounds there before the law prohibited this, about half of them had this type of DNA. Actually, to me, the most important thing in all of this in terms of Cayce and Atlantis is that there are structures, or were structures, that were built by these mound builders that were built to the specifications that Plato actually talked about a long time ago. The same dimensions, the same shape, the same sizes, and the same kind of rings of earth. And so that tells me that there is something to Cayce's statement that the mounds and the earthworks were built as replicas of the Atlantean experience.
Right. That's great. And why do you think they were building it in the circular structure that they were? I know you pursued the research into the spiritual significance behind it. What did you find with these circles? What exactly was the significance?
Okay, even today, mainstream archaeologists, and there's several of them, I've just reviewed some of their work recently, they are using terms that I was using actually in the early 1980s, and these terms are things like magic machines of Earth. These were sacred circles, and they were formations of Earth that somehow altered the electromagnetic field as people moved through the physical spaces. And they literally produced different types of spiritual experiences by moving through these fields of Earth. Wow. And the ones today, I mean, I'm amazed by this. They're using the exact same terminology. They are calling them sacred spaces, and they're calling them spaces of magic, where they went in and performed certain rituals, and it's the physical movement through one space to another with these different types of earthen structures surrounding you that appear to be the key in causing these almost paranormal experiences that they had. And they would do these things at different times. Sometimes they would do them during the eclipses. It's very clear that the eclipses were important to them. Lunar eclipses in particular were important in Ohio, particularly around Newark, Ohio, where this massive octagon and circle of Earth still exists today in pristine condition. And it's just massive. You can't see the whole thing standing there. And these are just incredible things, and people just do not know about them.
Right. And have you been able to duplicate this experience of yourself?
That's I've had experiences at some sites. I can't
Right.
say that I have had the experiences that they would have had way back when they built these things. And some of these go back to 3,000 BC or
Oh, wow.
5,000 years ago. We're talking about some things that are older than the pyramids in Egypt, at least according to mainstream Egyptology. The
Right.
earliest pyramid was built around 2,800 BC or so. And we're talking about mounds in the United States that were built as early as, well, the main structures started around the year 3,500 BC, which interestingly is about when Cayce said they started. Of course, Cayce said that back when they didn't believe any mounds were older than, say, the year 500. So he was unusual there, too. But I've had some experiences. Some of the groups that we've taken in, there's a fellow we take along on these trips who's a co-host. He and his wife, his name is Brent Raines, and his wife Joan is, I believe, half Cherokee. They perform a series of cleansing rituals and different ceremonies, and a lot of people have reported having experiences. And I had some also, which is actually unusual, and it's even more unusual that I would talk about them because I generally don't share any of my own experiences. Even in books, I don't talk about them. I usually talk about other people's. But yes, I've had a few things, and I would say they're more visionary in their nature, where literally you can sort of see things, almost like in a trance. And so most of those have taken place during the ceremonies that Brent and his wife Joan have performed at these various sites. They're pretty powerful. They're pretty powerful sites when you get in them, and if you really kind of blend in, you have to sort of touch the earth, which is something most of us don't do. Probably
Right.
nobody listening to this right now is touching earth. They're probably in a room somewhere. They're sheltered.
Right.
And they're not outside and they're not living in nature right now. But you
Right.
have to do that to actually touch these subtle energies. In fact, that's what they are. They're very subtle energies at work in these mound and actually pyramid sites.
Wow, that's great. Well, Greg, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back with more here on Reflections of Wisdom of Edgar Cayce with more from Greg Little. Welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. Today on the show we have Dr. Greg Little. Greg, I was wondering, you discussed a little bit about how the mound served a number of functions, and one of which you touched on was to help chart lunar cycles, which are very important to the mound builders. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, how the mounds exactly charted the lunar cycles?
Sure. Well, the lunar cycle actually lasts 18.61 years. And that's astonishing. And what it means is this: it takes 18.61 years for the moon's movements to repeat themselves, and then every 18.61 years it does the same thing over and over. It rises and sets in the same place. So in Newark, Ohio is the best example of this. They built this earthen structure called the Circle and Octagon. The circle is a perfect ring of earth that the outer walls are about 14 feet tall. It's totally flat in the interior. There were no trees in it when it was used. This circle then attached to an octagon enclosed 50 acres. The octagon had 8 truncated pyramids at each point of the 8 points inside of it, so that you really couldn't see out anywhere. The walls of the octagon were formed by earth, straight lines of earth that were about 12 to 15 feet tall. They're still there. This is still there. It's actually in perfect condition because it is called Mound Builders Golf Course. So it looks perfect. You have these
Right.
truncated pyramids that are actually tee boxes. And most people would say that's a terrible thing, but the truth is it has maintained this structure in perfect condition. So the way this works is this. You could stand in one area and you would look across one exact mound through a point, and you would see the moon rise or set at a very specific time. You would have to do this for over 18 years in order to chart all the movements of the moon. And by doing it, then you can predict exactly lunar eclipses. That is what this was used for. It is a massive structure, and it was proven by several archaeoastronomers back in the 1980s, and subsequently it's been shown to be true by mainstream archaeologists, and they just accept that that's what it was used for.
Right.
56 miles away from this one, there is an identical one, and leading down that 56 miles, it goes from Newark, Ohio to Chillicothe, Ohio. There are actually more than just one of these circles and octagons. This 56 miles is like a roadway that was built in 500 BC, over 2,500 years ago, and it has two walls of earth on the parallel lines of earth that run this whole 56 miles. The parallel lines of earth are a uniform 160 feet wide, and they run all the way from Newark to Chillicothe. Now, there were about 30 to 40 of these circle and octagons in the Ohio area alone, and somebody had to sit and watch for 19 years to chart the movements of the moon and then build these enormous structures. Now, what the archaeologists say is that were not they were imperishable machines which they could make predictions from. They could sit and watch over and over and then decide when to perform certain ceremonies. That's what these were used for. They are magic machines of Earth. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. And that begs the question, did you come across in your research clues as to how these were built?
Well, if you actually read a lot of the material about what have the archaeologists excavating these, they know that most of these were built essentially one basket of earth at a time, and they found the borrow pits, that's what they're called, where they dug out the earth. They usually have found those nearby. Typically they started by creating a straight line of stones. That's actually the way Serpent Mound in Ohio was built. It's a quarter-mile-long effigy of an uncoiling serpent, but in the middle of Serpent Mound, this long mound, there's a line of stones. So someone laid out these stones the way they wanted it to be, and then organized people and got people to do the work with some sort of social control to then form these structures. And some of them are just incredible. I mean, a lot of these sites would overwhelm the Great Pyramid. One site, for example, in Louisiana called Poverty Point. The amount of earth in Poverty Point, in the Poverty Point earthworks, that was moved and shaped by the people in the year roughly 3000 BC would fill the Great Pyramid 30 times. Now, I'm not making that number up. That's the number the archaeologists use. When you go there, that's what they'll tell you, and that's what's on their websites and in their books about this site. These things are enormous. They are huge. So there were reasons why all these people got together then and did this work. But somebody organized it, somebody laid it out, and somebody had the wherewithal to know how they wanted this shaped. And then people went ahead and did it. And it's all speculation as to why they did it and how they did a lot of this.
Right. And I know you mentioned a number of states so far. How many states exactly do you know that we'd be able to go find these mounds and visit them?
Oh, there are mounds in all 49 states.
Wow.
There are probably some in Alaska. I'm not as certain about that, but all the states have mounds. A lot of them have been just utterly and totally destroyed. New Jersey, for example, used to have a lot of mounds. They're all gone. I don't think there's any left in the entire state.
Oh, wow.
There were probably over 1 million mounds at one time in the United States. There was one county in Ohio that had 10,000 in just one county. There are some places, virtually every state. They're still in Washington State and Oregon. You can see them in Idaho and in the Dakotas. Virginia had a lot. There were a lot in the area where you are in Virginia Beach. There were once many there. In fact, the very first mound that was ever dug into and a report written about it was Thomas Jefferson did it in Virginia.
Oh, wow. Do you know what city that's in? Just curious, personally.
It was on his actual plantation that he owned. So
Okay,
I
Charlottesville,
can't.
Monticello.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah,
He
wonderful.
actually wrote quite a report about it, and his article on it was considered the template for archaeologists at the time. It was the first time anybody in the States had ever done it in an organized way.
Oh, wow. And being on that topic, you mentioned the Iroquois Confederacy a number of times. I was wondering if that ties in at all. I know the Iroquois Confederacy had an influence on our actual American Constitution.
Yeah, they
Did you
sure
find
did.
any did you find any connection there with the mound builders and the
Well, I
Iroquois and
can't
how
tell
it
you
connects to America?
I can't say there's a connection there. No, I've never found anything that connected that. I can tell you
Right.
that a lot of how the Iroquois lived and what they did fits very much with what Cayce said about the Atlanteans and how they lived. And the
Right.
Iroquois they did have a constitution which a lot of the American Constitution is based upon. They had rulers and they had chiefs, but individuals were allowed a great deal of freedom, and they could choose for themselves which way they wanted to go. And that's
Right.
what a lot of the Native Americans actually did. That they were quite egalitarian, and they were in a way democratic, but it's like majority rules, but you had minority rights. If you disagreed with the mainstream, you could disagree and go your own way.
Right. And in your research, did you find how exactly did the mound builders come to just cease to exist? Was it a genocidal thing? I know you'd mentioned something about savage Indians. What do we know what happened to them?
Yes, we really do. I just finished this book, like I said in the beginning, with Andrew Collins. It's called Path of Souls, and in it there are several chapters that explain what happened and what is called by a couple archaeologists the virtual amnesia of Native Americans. And roughly around the year 1540 or so, in the Americas, there were 57 million people at least already living here. When Columbus
Wow.
set foot in the Americas, Columbus never set foot in North America. He actually went into the Caribbean 4 times, but he never made it to North America. But at the time Columbus came here, there were at least 57 million people, and that is the lowest conservative number that's out there. Some
Wow.
archaeologists argue for almost 150 million people living in North and South America. The lowest number I've ever read by archaeologists about the people that were in North America, say the area we now call the United States, the lowest number is around 7 million. Most people believe there were about 15 to 20 million people here. It was not an unexplored continent. There were a lot of people here. There were vast regions of corn. There were cities. Cahokia in Illinois was in existence then. It's right on the other side of the Mississippi River from St. Louis. It was the largest city at the time. The minimum number of people living there then was 25,000. It's believed by many that there were 50,000 people there.
Wow.
So that is who was here. Then Hernando de Soto came in and went through all the southern states in America starting in 1539. He had 600 soldiers with him, conquistadors, and about 1,000 slaves that they brought in, black African slaves. They went through and they essentially they had battles with lots of Indians, and it's believed they killed probably 30 or 40,000 Indians in their battles. But they left behind diseases that the Indians had virtually no resistance to at all. Within 2 generations, the population of the natives fell 90 to 95% from diseases. And a good example is the Caribbean. Cuba and the Caribbean had somewhere around 5 million people in it. And actually, before De Soto got here, the population there fell to literally 0 from people either being killed by the Spanish conquistadors or by diseases. It went literally to 0. There are actual numbers in the area where I live in Memphis, Tennessee. I live near the Mississippi River. When De Soto went through Memphis to the Louisiana line along the Mississippi River. He found and reported in his chronicles 80 large cities and villages from Memphis south to Louisiana. And when LaSalle came through, less than 100 years later, LaSalle found 5 small villages. Everything else was gone. They were all dead. So at that time, everybody who was here was young, and they didn't have any storytellers left, and they literally forgot their heritage. They forgot their history. They did not have a written history as we understand it. The Iroquois actually did have a writing, but they wrote on bark, and bark doesn't last very long.
Right.
So that was the problem. All this information and all this knowledge simply vanished. And when the first Europeans came in and they met the Native American tribes who were here, they asked the tribes who built the mounds, and the tribes could not remember. To some extent, they saw these areas as danger areas because they had legends that all the people that were there died in all these huge cities like Cahokia. Cahokia was abandoned, and the Native Americans were actually very hesitant and cautious to even go there because they had legends that it was a place where everybody died.
Right.
And they did. They all died from diseases. All kinds of diseases came through. And it's a sad thing. But it started this mythology of the lost race of mound builders, and to some extent it gave the Europeans a kind of murky justification to come in and keep pushing the Indians off their land and force them further and further west. So it all goes into this history of the United States, the European settlements. You've got slavery intermixed with this, and it's just a murky area of American history.
Absolutely. And why do you think this isn't taught in history books? Is there can you pinpoint a reason as to why they don't talk about this?
Well, that is a good question. Now, I understand why it wasn't taught, say, when I was in school, or say when my father was in school, because they really didn't know quite as much as they do now. At this point in time, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I know that schools talk a great deal about slavery and civil rights, but the Native American history and their issues remains ignored. And it might be that while America has a horrible history with slavery, at least in its inception, the history regarding Native Americans is even far worse. Basically, we took the entire country from who was here. Of course, the argument was when they came in, they took it from whoever was here then. And really, that's the way history actually functions. History is written by the winners. The losers seldom get to really have any say in it. But I don't really know why it isn't written. I'm asked all the time to go into schools and give little talks to the kids about Native Americans and mounds and so on. And I'm part Native American, and I know a lot of the beliefs and a lot of the rituals and so on. But the kids have never heard about any of it. All they've ever seen is what's on television. It's like John Wayne. Actually, a lot of Native Americans, that's all they know about themselves. They've seen the movies.
And do you think we're going to see that change in a short time to come, or at least sometime in the future?
I don't.
No.
I really don't. I don't think that'll change. I think it's up to individuals to find out for themselves and look into things. I don't think it's going to change. I think we are at a point where what matters to people is texting and Twitter and their friends and jobs and the economy and cars and so on. That's just, and to some, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's the nature of life. People are focused in their own world, and this is it's a large sort of global issue that no one's really going to think too deeply about.
Right. That's a shame. Well, we're going to take another.
In a way, it is.
Yeah. It's an honor, though. We're very blessed to have scholars like yourself who are, out doing the research, out in the field, getting their hands dirty and figuring this out, and writing books about it, because there are people out there who are very interested in this. So we're very lucky to have people like yourself who are putting it out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very nice. Thank you.
Of course. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be right back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce, with more from Dr. Gregory Little. and welcome back to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. We have on the show today Dr. Gregory Little, and we're talking about the mound builders. Greg, you also mentioned finding numerous large skeletons, or not yourself, but there have been found skeletal remains on these sites, some upwards of 7 to 9 feet in length. This is something that's very fascinating to me. From what I understand, these giant skeletal remains have been found in a lot of excavation sites in a number of states, oftentimes quick to be kind of taken away by maybe the Smithsonian, other people. I'm not quite sure. Hopefully you can enlighten us to that. But Cayce referred to these unusually large people as the lords of the land, which I thought was really fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about what's known about these giant skeletons?
Well, yes, that's about half this book that I've talked about is directly about the giant skeletons. And right now it's a very hot topic.
Right.
There's the belief that the Smithsonian has been in a conspiracy to hide the information about the giant skeletons. People claim that there are, well, I know, here's the bottom line with the numbers. There are 1,400 old newspaper articles that have already been recovered from various archives about giants recovered in mounds. Now, I have spent, the countless hours poring through these, and not just looking at the articles, but trying to find original sources and running down all of these stories. And, of course, I haven't run down all 1,400 of them. But what I did do and run down every one of is all the ones the Smithsonian reported and all the ones the Smithsonian was supposedly involved in. In the Smithsonian's own Bureau of Ethnology books, which were annual reports that they put out, there was about a 9-year period where the Smithsonian was directly involved in excavating mounds. During that 9-year period, the Smithsonian excavated 2,000 mounds and pulled out approximately 40,000 what they call artifacts. That does not mean 40,000 skeletons.
Right.
But they went into 2,000 mounds. Out of those 2,000 mounds, they sometimes reported the skeletons that were found. They sometimes gave the size. Sometimes they did not. They sometimes said what was found with these skeletal remains, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they said they were male or female. Sometimes they gave the numbers, and other times they'd say we found a heap of skeletons, or they said we found many. There were some that were quite specific. In the two Smithsonian books that reported on all this, and those two books, one of them was published in 1894, and the other one, 1884, and the other one was 1894. Now, I have actual original copies of both of those. I went through every page of one of them, which was 804 pages, and carefully read them all and made notations about all these large skeletons they found. The other one had exactly 104 pages that was devoted to their mound excavation reports, so I did the same thing with that. Out of those two books, I found 24 large skeletons, almost all of which were described as over 7 feet. The tallest one was 7 feet 6 inches.
Wow.
That was actually found in West Virginia. The largest concentration of all of these was in an area of West Virginia in what is called the Kanoa River Valley. It's spelled like Kanoa, K-A-N-A-W-H-A, but it's pronounced Kanoa. Mm-hmm. That area is extremely unusual. Just 2 weeks ago, we took a trip through there and went to many of these mounds that the Smithsonian excavated to pull out as much information as we could and to get some pictures. So that's the Smithsonian's involvement with those. Now, today, the Smithsonian just recently put out a press release where they essentially said there were no giants in the ancient world, that it's a total myth. I've read several others that I have now quoted to that were from scientists and various archaeologists, that some of whom were with the Smithsonian, who said there were no giants found. A person 7 feet tall is not a giant, but they are exceedingly rare. Very few people know the percentage of humans that are today 7 feet tall. And the reason is the percentage is it's less than 1%, so it's 0.001%. and then you add 6 zeros, 0, 0, 0,
Oh,
0,
wow.
0, 0, 7. That's the actual percentage of humans who today are 7 feet tall. And if you multiply it out times the 7.3 billion people who live on Earth today, you'll come up with a number of around 50,000. There's actually 49,000 people in the world that are 7 feet tall. Sounds like a lot, but the percentage is incredibly small. In West Virginia, I actually calculated the percentage of 7-footers that the Smithsonian pulled out in West Virginia. And I did that by taking the actual number of skeletons they reported at 7 feet, and of course divided that by the total number of skeletons they pulled out. And I came up with a number of, it's just over 7% of all the skeletons they pulled out in West Virginia were 7 feet tall, which is actually astonishing. That is incredibly high.
Right.
There really aren't many 7-footers even in the NBA today. It's known that more than half of the basketball players that are said to be 7 feet actually are not 7 feet tall.
Right.
So that's astonishing. The other reports, I've run down loads of them, those newspaper reports, including some people that were supposedly 18 feet tall. And the truth is, almost all of those large reports just seem to vanish at the source. That means when you read them, it is in a book somewhere, like the history of Winona County, which is a county in Minnesota, talks about, and it literally says, some men digging a cellar found a skeleton. That's it. That was the report. And then they say that they saw it, they estimated its size at 9 feet. And then they found another one that was 10 feet long. But that's it. It just vanishes. So I can't find anything over, I found some that I believe are 8 feet tall, but that's it. I can't find anything over that. But if you were living at that time when the mound builders were here, the average person was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and the average man was about 5 feet 6. And if you've ever stood next to a 7-foot person, which I have several times, they look like giants.
Yeah, absolutely.
I stood next to Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, which some of your older people will remember, and the entire Philadelphia 76ers basketball team and half the Boston Celtics. And I felt like I was surrounded by giants.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
let's go back to this. These skeletons that the Smithsonian actually pulled out, which they didn't really want the skeletons. This is the weird thing. You'll often read that the skeletons were shipped to the Smithsonian. They weren't. The Smithsonian, in their actual letters to their field agents, where they employed these people to do the work, which I found their actual letters, they only wanted skulls. They wanted to display skulls, none of which, by the way, are displayed today. It's illegal for them to display the skulls, so they've actually had all those reburied. They have had all the skeletal remains they had reburied. They were so overwhelmed with receiving thousands and thousands of boxes from all over the country, they actually didn't even open them. They simply put them in warehouses, and then when federal laws were changed in 1989, Native American groups went in and simply claimed certain areas where where these skeletal remains were taken from. They took them back to the reservations and reburied them. The Smithsonian right now has less than 300 pieces of skeletal remains, and virtually all of those 300 pieces are from Latin America, and they cannot get anybody to claim them. They'd like to get rid of them because it costs them a lot of money to retain them. But it's only 300. People think they have millions of them up there, and they have none, just these 300 pieces. That's it.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's really a very strange story.
It really is it's really shrouded in mystery, which is, I think,
it is. And
for yourself and
large,
myself. Yeah, I'm sure that just makes it even more fascinating.
Were pulled out of these mounds. That when they were pulled out of these mounds, they were in these tombs at the very base of the mound. They were in huge stone-chambered tombs, and I've got some great photos of these stone chambers. I had never seen them before, but I've got these great photos, and these things were amazing. And you'd see these earthen mounds, and you just figure it's a big heap of earth. But they weren't. They had these massive stone structures in them that were built out of fine-cut very carefully laid together stone, creating tombs. And they would
Right.
move various skeletons in and out, but the largest people were always buried at the most important spot, and usually they had loads and loads of very impressive artifacts with them. So these
Right.
tall people were the elite. They were the leaders. There is no doubt about that.
Wow, that's incredible. I can't wait to see what yourself and other scholars are able to, uncover in the years to come. I'm excited.
It really is interesting stuff, and actually, it's the first time I'd ever really dug in. That's a pun. Really dug into all the information and tried to find all these old photographs. Which, when the Smithsonian was doing this work in the late 1800s, they did not take photos of it all. And even some of the other people who were doing excavations at the time. There's one guy by the name of C.B. Moore, who came out of Philadelphia. C.B. Moore obliterated more mounds than the Smithsonian did. And Moore did it over like a 25-year period, this one guy who was simply wealthy. And his goal was to dig into every mound that he could reach by a navigable river. And he actually completed his task. His goal was to obliterate the mounds and get every artifact out of them that was of any value. Now, he didn't want them for himself. He sent them all to a museum in Philadelphia. And almost, it's ironic that all of his artifacts wound up in the Smithsonian.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to quick touch on before we run out of time. You and your wife, along with a few others, are conducting an ARE sponsored tour to mound sites this summer. Can you tell
That
us a
is
little bit
correct.
about that? I'm sure there's a
Well,
lot of
yeah,
listeners out
that
there.
tour is July 8th through the 13th, right after the
Okay.
4th of July. They're usually very comfortable. We take these buses. We show films along the way, but we're starting in Columbus, Ohio actually, we're going to leave July 9th from a hotel in Columbus, Ohio. We will go to this massive site in Newark, Ohio, the Circle and Octagon. The Circle's 30 acres. The Octagon is 50 acres. And from there, we'll go to a place called Great Circle that is identical in size and shape to Avebury in England.
Oh, wow.
And even when we took Andrew Collins to this place years ago, he stood there, and I remember Andrew saying, you could get 50 Stonehenges in this. And he said, I can't understand why anybody would want to build something this big. Then the next day, we go to Grave Creek in West Virginia. We're also going to go to a weird site in Marietta, Ohio, and go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the site of the Mothman prophecies. Still America's most tragic bridge collapse. A place where a lot of paranormal stuff went on in 1967, and it actually does relate to mounds, and I'll explain that actually on the trip. And from there we go to Portsmouth, Ohio, which is one of really a very incredible site. One of the Atlantean structures was there, and we're going to visit the site, but most of it, of course, has been destroyed now. And we're going to Serpent Mound and Sight Mound in Ohio, and along the way we'll have a number of little ceremonies and things that we do.
Wonderful. Sounds fantastic.
People can find out about it. Click on the ARE website and just go to ARE Tours, and it's there.
Absolutely. I'll make sure I give them all the information again at the end of the show. I want to touch real quick as a last thing here. I understand that you recently completed the book that you've talked about. It's about ancient mound builders and kind of their beliefs about death. Can you tell us a little bit about that and briefly about what their idea of death was and how it relates to the Cayce material?
Yeah, I can tell you very simply what they thought, and it's amazing. It's somewhat similar to Edgar Cayce's ideas. I was stunned when I saw this, and this has only been uncovered by mainstream archaeologists in the past years. I have never talked about it before, but I have all the details in the new book, and I'll be talking about it on the tour. But they believed that when you died, we actually had two souls. They believed that the physical body had an animating soul called the life soul, and they considered that dangerous. But you had a soul that existed forever, and that second soul then took a journey to the west that took about 3 days. And then at a very specific time, the soul would take a leap of faith into the sky to what they called the Hand Constellation. And the Hand Constellation is a severed hand. The wrist is formed by the 3 belt stars of Orion, and there is an eye or an oji. It's the eye and hand symbol, an oji, which is a portal in the sky beneath these three belt stars. And when they hit that oji, which is known as the Orion Nebula or Messier 42, that's its actual number, you then got access to the Milky Way, and the Milky Way was the path of souls, and from there you took a journey to the dark rift of the Milky Way where you met an adversary. The adversary was at the star Deneb. It was variously seen as a raptor bird, primarily an eagle, and you had a judging of your soul at that point. That is where the Cygnus constellation is. And if you passed that judgment, you could move on and you'd sort of pop out into the sky world or above the sky world to the realm of the ancestors where all the souls are. If you didn't meet the judgment, you might be sent down a dead end. You could be pushed into the underworld, or you could be reincarnated. If you missed the leap, the initial leap, this leap of faith to this Hand constellation, if you missed it, you would be caught by a spider woman, and the spider woman would do one of two things. She would either obliterate your soul or send you back to Earth for reincarnation. The Native Americans also believed that if a child died and the parents wanted it to reincarnate, they could simply bury the child in a hill nearby. There were only certain times they could perform these rituals. They were mortuary rituals, and they were highly controlled by an elite class of people who used quite specific symbols, and it's through all these symbols and artifacts that archaeologists have finally figured all this out. And it's actually very incredible. It's just amazing to me. I never thought they'd know what all these symbols meant, but they do.
Wow. How fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing all this with Greg. I can't tell you how fascinating this is. And, if anybody wants to get more into it, I'm sure we'll give them all the information to sign up for this tour and give them the information on your book so they can read about it. And I look forward to reading your book when it comes out. Can't wait.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm glad Reflections is back.
Of course. Thank you so much. It was an honor to have you on the show, Greg.
Okay.
Take care. I hope everyone enjoyed my interview with Dr. Greg Little. Don't forget, Greg and his wife, Laura, will be leading the upcoming ARE tour of the Ohio and West Virginia Mound Builders. And this is from July 8th through the 13th. For details, you can go to edgarcayce.org/tours or call the travel programs office toll free at 888-273-3339. The registration deadline is June 2nd, 2014, so sign up now. Visit edgarcayce.org/blog to read an excerpt from their article, The Mound Builders, Giant Skeletons, and Soul's Journey to the Sky. The full article is available in the Summer 2014 Venture Inward newsletter, available online to ARE members at edgarcayce.org/members. On behalf of everyone here at the Association for Research and Enlightenment and moretalk.tv, thank you so much for listening to Reflections, the Wisdom of Edgar Cayce. I'm your host, Brenton Bickerstaff, reminding you to always strive to make the world a better place because you have lived in it, and never stop asking the big questions. I'll see y'all next week.